please type if you can hear me. Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد والثناء لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the third and last session on Introduction to Traditional Logic. Thank you for making it this far. Inshallah, today is going to be a little bit more difficult than last week because we're essentially going to be discussing the final purpose of why logic is even studied. If you recall, during the last week, we began the discussion on tasdeeqat, or when you do tasdeeq of something, or when you affirm and assent something. What are we exactly doing? We said that we have certain concepts, okay? In the first section of tasawwarat, we said we have concepts, and when we take multiple concepts with our intellect, we can put these concepts together and we can affirm a relationship between them. So for example, if I take the concept of white and if I take the concept of wall, I can come and say that, the wall is white. This is me doing an affirmation. It's me doing a tasdeeq. So we talked about how to do tasdeeq and the different things we can do with a proposition. We said we can take an equivalent conversion, we can, figure out its contradiction, so on and so forth. Today, what we're going to do is discuss what we can do with more than one premise, more than one proposition, and how we can actually build an argument. And what type of argument is reliable, what type of argument is not reliable, what is a fallacy? You guys may have heard logical fallacies, what are they, and so on and so forth. So inshallah, let's begin with our discussion today. I will go for our prayers around in about 30 minutes. So inshallah, just remember that as well. Okay. So the last section that is discussed in mantiq is called argument or reasoning. Okay. What this is any logician's final goal. The whole reason why logic is studied is for this specific section. Even the section on definitions, the section on the dalala that we did, signification, everything that we've done so far is for this specific reason. Because you want to be able to take these premises and build an argument. Anything that you're gonna say that has some sort of, it has to be a khabar, if you guys remember. It can be an insha. From that khabar, from that proposition, you're trying to get a point across to somebody. When you try to get a point across, the other person needs to know how reliable this point is. Okay? For example, if someone comes and says that, I heard something behind the door, therefore there was a man behind the door. The person who's in front of me, he'll be like, okay, how can I trust this person? So you're gonna say, okay, anyone who hears a knock behind the door, it means that he knows that there's somebody behind the door. Something like that, okay? You do a quick analysis in your mind. Sometimes it's so quick that you don't really realize what you're doing, but because it's happening so quickly. They say that there are three main approaches to building an argument or, bringing evidence for something. And it's these three that I've written over here. One of them is called qiyas, one of them is called tamthil, and the last one is called istiqra. We're gonna explain these. Okay. First and foremost, the first way of arguing is called qiyas, deduction. Now, don't confuse this with the qiyas that you hear about in fiqh, where they say, for example, the Sunnis, they believe in qiyas, and the Shias don't believe in qiyas. This is not that qiyas, okay? That qiyas which we talk about in fiqh is the second one, which we're going to call it tamthil over here. Now, this is also another reason why it's important to study or get an introduction to Islamic sciences, because you get to know which word is being used in which meaning in which subject. Okay? So when you start seeing the philosophers or the logicians talking about qiyas in their works, they're not talking about qiyas of Abu Hanifa. Okay? They're talking about this qiyas that we're going to talk about today, and which is, really important for our discussion. Qiyas, inshallah, since the whole section is going to be about qiyas, I'm not going to explain that too much right now. Let's explain the other two. Analogy, okay, or tamthil, we said is similar to the qiyas that is done in fiqh. What happens in this? What do you do in this exactly? This is when you see two entities, okay, two different things, and you see that both of these things share a single or a similar property or a quality. And then you see that one of these entities also has a certain other quality or an attribute. Because of that, you come and say that this second entity also must have this other quality of the first entity. Let me explain. If you say, for example, blood and urine and any other sort of liquids that come out of our body are najis. Okay? Blood is najis, urine is najis, so on. They're najis. Then you come across and you realize that, okay, sweat is also a type of liquid, that comes out of our body. So blood, urine, and sweat, they both share the quality of sort of coming out of our body. Okay? But then you say that, okay, blood, urine, and so on, these things are najis. Therefore, that means that the sweat also must be najis. Okay? This is what we're calling tamthil. And if you notice, it's a qiyas which is done in fiqh. Someone can come and do this qiyas in fiqh. Okay, and they might give a fatwa saying, therefore sweat is najis. This is the qiyas that we don't agree with. Okay, we don't agree with this qiyas. And believe it or not, some of the Sunni sects accept it. All of their sects, but some of their sects have accepted it, especially the Hanafis. They've completely accepted this mode of reasoning. Okay, we don't accept it. The best example I can say is the example of Shaitan. Okay, what did he say? He says to God, خَلَقْتَنِي مِن نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِن طِينٍ. You created me from fire, and you created Adam from teen, clay. And because fire is superior to clay, therefore I'm also superior to Adam. Okay? Whereas that superiority had nothing to do with clay or what's it called, the fire. Okay? That's why in our riwayat, in our hadith, it says the first person to do qiyas was actually Shaitan. He did a qiyas, sorry, tamsil. I'm using the qiyas in the fiqhi sense. Let me just go with the mantiq. Tamsil. He's the first person to do tamsil. Okay? Or, for example, we have, certain narrations that say, before you choose a spouse to get married to, investigate into his or her family. Check out how is his family, how is her family, and then base your selection off of that. Why? Because the spouse will share some qualities of her family or his family. This is also a tamsil, because you're sort of comparing, you're doing an analogy between the spouse that you're supposed to marry with their family. Now, what is the merit of tamsil? Does it result in certainty or does it not result in certainty? We say that, look, tamsil does not result in certainty. Okay? At the very most, it may result in speculation, not even of a high type of speculation, depending on the context. For example, this principle, right, that says choose a spouse, investigate his or her family. So let's just say his or her family is really bad. Okay? The narration says, pick the spouse based on the qualities of his family or her family, because the qualities will be shared in the spouse. Is this principle certain in every single case or no? We say no, it isn't. What is happening here is that you can say that, many times that if a spouse comes from a bad family, yeah, the bad family may have had an influence on that individual, and therefore that individual could also be just as bad as them. It's giving you a standard to look into, but that doesn't mean it's the final verdict, okay? Because it's not anything for certain. You don't know for with certainty whether the spouse actually took on the negative qualities of his or her family. You don't actually know that for sure. Or for example, when we say sweat also comes out of the body, therefore it's najis. Are you sure about this? No, you're not really sure about it because we don't really know the reason why blood and urine is najis. Who says that the reason why blood and urine is najis is because it come out of the body? Okay, if you knew the reason that the reason why blood and urine is najis is because it comes out of the body, then you can make that argument for sweat as well. But no, that's not the reason why blood is najis. Just because it comes out of the body. Who said that? Okay. Otherwise, vomit would be najis. Nobody said vomit is najis. It also comes out of the body, for example. Okay. Or the fact that fire is superior to clay. Who says fire is superior to clay? Where did you presume that? And who says that Hazrat Adam's superiority had to do with him being made from clay? Okay. This is called analogy, and this is not reliable in the discussions of logic and philosophy. So you cannot bring a tamsil to argue for something that you want to sort of convince somebody with certainty. Why? Because it doesn't result in certainty. It's not a certain argument. Uh, it's a third one, which is called induction. Now, if any one of you is in science, physics, and so on, medical studies and stuff, definitely look into the discussion called problem of induction. Okay? The problem of induction. This has been a huge discussion in the last century in the West, in the East. Shahid Sadr has written works on this. It's a really important discussion. What is induction? What is istiqra, as they say? This is when you look at certain particular instances of something, but you come and you give a general principle about it. For example, I may say that words are in any language are either prepositions, either they are nouns, or they are verbs. Okay, and I come and I say this as a general principle. I say yes, words. There are three types of words. Either they are prepositions, harf, or they are verbs, fi'l, or they are nouns, ism. Okay, and I come and ask you, like, is this restriction, that the fact that you restricted it to three, was this based on some philosophical reasoning, meaning that it is impossible, rationally speaking, for there to have been a fourth division, fourth type of word? You're gonna say no. I just went and I investigated, I looked into the dictionaries and the way I use my language, and I came across three. I came across three things. Okay, I did an induction, istiqra. I went and looked around. I didn't go and investigate every single word in the English language or in the Arabic language. But as far as I've seen so far, this is the three I've found. Okay. Now, if you notice, even though I only investigated a limited amount of words, okay, I didn't investigate every single word in the language. But what I did here is that I gave a general principle. I gave a general qaida. I said words are of three types: this, and this. Can this result in certainty or not? This is the issue, and this is the question. Now, science is based on induction. Okay, and this is the issue now. Can induction give you certainty or doesn't give you certainty? If you go by the philosophical view, I don't know if you guys remember last week, on the first slide of the second session, I talked about yaqeen. And I said there are, two types of yaqeen. One yaqeen is the one you guys are familiar with. Okay, if I look at the wall, I see the wall is white, therefore I know the wall is white. I'm certain that the wall is white. I said in mantiq and in philosophy, especially nowadays, that's not the yaqeen that they have in mind when they talk about yaqeen. It's a different type of yaqeen, it's a much higher level of yaqeen. I'll get back to that in a few slides later. Induction, they say, at the very most, results in the yaqeen that we talk about in our day-to-day life, which in philosophy is not really 100%. Okay, it's maybe 99%, 98%, a high degree of itminan, a high degree of speculation. That's what it truly is. Okay, if you go and you experiment, different types of water, and you see that the water is boiling at 100 degrees, did you really go and test out and induce every single water molecule on this planet or anywhere else to see that whether it all boils at 100 degrees? No, you haven't. You only went and tested a couple of molecules or a couple of bottles of water, for example. And based on that, you realize, okay, this is happening again and again. Every time I boil water, it only boils at 100 degrees. Yet you come and say that all water boils at 100. How did you say all? You didn't test all the water. How did you say all water? Okay, so they say you cannot say all water. You can't give a kulli, you can't give a general statement in logic and philosophy. In our day-to-day life, yes, we say this all the time. You go and experiment something, we know with with our degree of yaqeen, we say, yeah, water boils 100 degrees. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm 100% sure. Water boils 100 degrees. That level of certainty is not what we discuss in philosophy. We don't care about that because that is not true certainty. Because you can always give the rational and philosophical possibility that there may be some molecule of water somewhere on this planet that you haven't tested that may boil at, I don't know, 105 degrees. You haven't tested it, so there's no way for you to know. Okay. Famous view that analogy and induction are also a type of qiyas. When we do qiyas on the next slide, you'll see what we mean by that. Meaning both analogy and induction, there is a type of qiyas happening. There's a type of argumentation happening that is built on a specific type of argument. Here we're going to show you guys now what is qiyas. Qiyas is essentially the way you build an argument with more than one premise. Okay, and they say that if you have the premises set in a specific way, the conclusion is for certain 100% that is going to be the conclusion of it. Okay, there are 4 ways of doing qiyas. Okay, syllogism it's called. There are 4 ways, 4 figures if you want to call them. You guys have to write this down, by the way, because after this we're going to go through each one of these separately. So write it down just the way I've written it, and make sure, because the M I've put in red for a reason, and that M is going to be necessary in the later slides. What you have here is figure 1. Okay, you have the minor premise at the top. You have what you call the major premise, which is the second one, and the third one is your conclusion. Okay, figure 1 is the way we build arguments pretty much most of the time, if not all the time. What do we say there? We have a proposition. We say P is M. Okay, these are just variables I've made up. There's nothing specific about them. P is M. And then I have to bring the M, which we're going to call the median or middle term. Okay. Median or middle term is called M. The median has to be repeated in the major premise. But look at the order and it's being repeated, okay? In the minor premise, it was a predicate. It's not the subject. Okay? If I say Ali is white. Okay, the word white is the median. It's a predicate. In the major premise, the word white has to become the subject now. So I'll say all whites are, I don't know, bright. The conclusion will be Ali is bright. Okay, and this conclusion, if the premises are, for certain, then the conclusion will also be certainly true. Okay, that's how this works. In the second figure, it's the same thing, but the median now becomes a predicate in both of the propositions, both in the minor premise and in the major premise. Inshallah, we'll do examples of these later on. I just want you guys to copy down this chart so that when we do the examples, you can just look back to this, because instead of me going back to this slide again and again. And then you have the third figure where the median becomes the subject in both of the premises, and figure 4 is the opposite of figure 1. Figure 4 and 3 are not used too much. Figure 1 is the one that is mostly used. 4 is rarely used. I don't know, I've barely looked into it. It's not really used too much. But figure 1 for sure, it's always used, and we use we actually use it all the time. Okay, some things I want to say before we go to the next slide is that each of these arguments, there are some general rules that you need to know about these. Okay? One of them is obvious. One of them is that in any syllogism, any qiyas, middle term has to be repeated in both the premises. Okay, so if you look here, the minor premise also has the median or the middle term, and the major premise also has it. Yes, the ordering of it can change. Sometimes it's a predicate in one premise and a subject in the other premise. Sometimes it's a predicate in both premises. Sometimes it's a subject in both premises. The point is that it's always repeated, which is what's important. Okay, you have to repeat it, otherwise you won't be able to build an argument. The conclusion, okay, conclusion, for example, I've written P is S, right? Okay, let me just rule number 1 is the median needs to be repeated. Okay, in both the premises. The third rule, and you need to remember, it's going to be useful, that the conclusion always follows the lower of the two premises. What do I mean by that? Let's just say I said P is M, and then I said M is not S. Okay? The conclusion has to be negative. I have to say P is not S. Okay? If any of the premises has a negative, if you remember we said every proposition can be affirmative or negative, it can be negating something. We can say something is or something is not, something will be, something will not be. If you have this negative, the conclusion is going to be negative. Also, if you have a particular inner premise, meaning instead of saying all M is S, I have some M are S. The conclusion will also be some. You can never be able to give a general principle, general conclusion. You can never say all P is S. You're going to have to say some P are S. Okay? So it follows the lower of the two premises. Whichever premise has a sort of lower quality, meaning if they're negative or if there's a particular in it, the conclusion will also be particular. Okay? When we do examples, it'll become more clear, inshallah. Okay. We're going to go through each of the figures now, one by one. Figure 1 says that the median becomes the predicate in the minor premise, and it is a subject in the major premise. Okay. and it has conditions. So by the way, each of the figures also have their own specific conditions. Okay, for figure 1, we say that the minor premise has to be affirmative. It can't be negative. You can't say this animal is not human. Okay, it has to be a affirmative. And the major premise must be a universal or a general premise, meaning you have to use, it has to presume the word all in it. You can't say some humans have eyes. You have to say all. The major premise in figure 1 is always all, everybody, it's general. What does it say? It says this animal is a human. And we have our second premise, we say all humans have eyes. What does the condition become? The conclusion, sorry. Okay. The conclusion becomes this animal has eyes. Or in fact, I should say, sorry, why did I say this animal instead of all animals? I said this animal has eyes because what is the lore of the two premises over here? Word all or the word this? Because when you use the word this, you limited it to one particular animal. Okay? Because it's particular, the conclusion has to be particular as well. I can't say all animals have eyes. I can't say that. Unless I said in my minor premise, all animals have eyes, all animals are humans, only then I can say all animals have eyes. Okay? But in that case, obviously the minor premise will be wrong because not all animals are humans. So I said this animal is a human. Why did we say that a minor premise must be affirmative? What if both of our premises were negative? This is what will happen. If I said, oh, sorry, this didn't come out properly. Oops. Here. Not working. It's coming out compact together. Okay, what I'm trying to say here is that both premises should not be negative. Meaning what? Premise 1, no man is a horse. Okay. And then I say no horse is a rational being. Now, if you look at it, both of the premises are actually true. No man is a horse and no horse is a rational being. But the conclusion is false. I'll end up saying no man is a rational being. This is false. Okay, because humans are rational beings. That's why we say make sure that both premises are not negative. One of them has to be affirmative, and in our case, it is the minor premise. In figure 1, minor premise has to be positive. Okay, it should be something like, every man is a horse. Only then it will make sense. Okay, but over there, obviously the premise is wrong. Every man is not a horse. No man is a horse. But I'm saying in order for it to be correct, it has to be a correct premise, but it also has to be a positive premise. It can be negative. Okay. Also, you notice I said that the major premise has to be a universal. What if we made both of our premises particulars? This is what's going to happen. If I say some humans are animals, and then I say some animals are horses, some humans are animals. That's correct. Also, some animals are horses. That's also correct. But the conclusion is wrong. Some humans are horses. That's false. Why is this false? Why did we reach this false conclusion? It's because both of our premises were particular. They weren't universals. The major was not universal. We said some in both of them, and especially the last one. Okay, and that's why there's a condition that the major premise has to be a universal. Okay, so I'm gonna go pray right now. When I come back, we're gonna do some actual examples. I have a couple of hadiths, simple ones. We can just look into those and see how we can use figure one to derive conclusions, inshallah. Okay. Just give me 3 4 minutes and I'll be back. If there's any questions about this, just type them up. I'll read them when I come back. Assalamu alaikum. Alim. Yeah, yeah. Look, that's really good that you figured that out. I was seeing if anyone would figure it out. Uh, yes, technically, what I should have written is every man is not a horse. Okay, and then I should say that every horse is not a rational being. That is the correct way of writing it. But usually, because we try to ensure that you get the point across, I was actually going to make this, I was going to put this disclaimer in the beginning of my talk. I forgot about it. Let me just say it right now. A lot of the discussions I'm going to do today, they're not going to be super, super precise. Okay. And the reason why they're not going to be very precise is because the reason why we study logic in the seminaries is for a very particular reason. It's primarily for using in philosophy later on. And because it's for philosophy, the type of precision that is required in that is different than the reason why I'm covering logic with you guys. Okay, I'm not really covering it because you're going to do philosophy right after this. Okay, this is not even enough logic. You need to spend way more time on it before you do philosophy. I'm doing logic so that you guys can at least get a general taste of how arguments are made. Because when you talk in real life, you're probably going to say no man is a horse. That's actually what you're going to say. You're not going to say every man is not a horse. That's not usually how people talk. Every man is not a horse. Every horse is not. You're usually going to bring in the word no. So because of that, in English, I'm just trying to. It's called tasamuh in Arabic. I'm trying to sort of going easygoing over here. Okay, if you can get the point that no man is a horse, I'm trying to get a negative. That what I mean here is a negative statement. That's fine, but that's good that you had the sort of the precision over here. You figured out, okay, the relationship is of is. It's not of is not. So yeah, technically it should be is not. Every man is not a horse in the example that I've given above. I don't know, Ali, brother Ali, if that was clear, like why I used the word is instead of is not. Yeah. If you want to go very precise, then it should be is not. Tasamu just means easy, meaning easygoing, like not being super precise here, because if I become super precise, then half the discussions I'm gonna have to explain what's going on, why it's not going on. It's not possible for me to become very precise here, because the reason why we study logic is for philosophy, and the type of precision that is required is different than the reason why I'm covering the subject with you for the time being. Not to mention that just this discussion is, volumes of books have been written on just the topic of qiyas and burhan. There's no way for me to sort of, bring all that stuff in 30 minutes. It's impossible. So just a taste of it. Inshallah, later on in the future, if you can do it, properly in more detail, if you have more time, we'll do it in the future, inshallah. Okay, let's continue with our examples for figure 1. Okay, you guys will have to tell me what the conclusion is over here. Okay, let's say I have a minor premise for hadith. Okay, every innovation is minor premise and then that's major premise. What will be the conclusion? So this is literally a hadith. Hadith says that every innovation is misguidance and every misguidance leads to hellfire. And this is figure 1. This is figure 1. Ahsant, yeah. Every innovation leads to hellfire. So the Imam comes and he says, kullu bid'atin dalala, like every innovation is misguidance and every misguidance leads to hellfire. He just did a qiyas for you over there. The Imams in the hadith itself, there's the figure 1 that you can make out of that statement. And from that, you can derive the conclusion that, okay, the Imam means that every innovation leads to hellfire. Okay? What the middle term here was the word misguidance. That was repeated twice. Yeah, that is that's how it is. So if you change the word innovation, yeah, innovation comes down and the hellfire will come down. The middle term is removed from the premise. Okay. Second example we'll do now is you have a minor premise as some infallibles are prophets, and we say every prophet must be followed. The conclusion from that. Yeah, it's some infallibles must be followed. Okay. Why did we say some? Because our minor premise we wrote some. Okay. If we had said every infallible is a prophet, then the conclusion will also become every. But because we use the word some, the conclusion has to have the word some in it. It has to be the lower of the two premises. By the way, just because the conclusion says some infallibles must be followed, it doesn't negate that the other some, okay, because when you say some, that means there's another group that you're not talking about. That doesn't mean that they must not be followed. Okay? You haven't said anything about the other group of infallible people. A lot of people assume that if you make this type of a conclusion, okay, some infallibles must be followed. That doesn't mean that that some infallible must not be followed. That's not what this means. Okay, so never assume the sort of the opposite and the contradiction of that uh, without, because we're not talking about the other half of the infallible, the other set of infallibles. Okay, this is another hadith. Imam Ali, whoever keeps himself ignorant, neglects himself, and whoever neglects himself destroys himself. And this is also figure 1. Yeah. Whoever keeps himself ignorant destroys himself. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is gonna be the one argument figure that we're gonna be making more use of today. Okay. Let's move on to figure 2 now. In figure 2, your median or your middle term becomes the predicate in both of the premises. Okay. So we say, and what is the condition for it? The major premise, which is the bottom one, it must be universal. Okay. And both the premises must differ in their being affirmative or negative. Meaning one of them has to be negative, one of them has to be positive. We don't care which one, okay, whether the minor or the premise or the major, but one of them has to be different. Okay? Both can be affirmative and both can be negative. Example, all cattle have hooves. Okay. Now we have to bring the word hooves, which is our predicate, into another predicate in our major premise. We say all birds do not share the features of an animal that has hooves. So we say all cattle do not share the features of a bird. Okay. So it's clear. Let me just do examples now. Called hadiths. All who obey Allah, not obeys. All who obey Allah are successful. So minor premise. One who does not struggle is not successful. Okay, so that's my negative. All who obey Allah are successful. So always look for the median first. Our median is, or the middle term in this example, is going to be in the predicate. What will be the answer to this? No one? No, the predicate is not different. The predicate is the word successful. So look, the first thing you have to look for is the subject in the minor premise. You bring that down. You say one who does not struggle does not obey Allah. Why are we saying does not? Because remember, the conclusion is the lower of the two premises. Remember that? So if the word some was written in it, I would bring the word some down instead of all. And if there's a negative premise in it, I'll have to bring that negative relationship to the conclusion as well. Okay? One who does not struggle does not obey Allah. No, the word successful will be removed because it's a median. We don't bring the median in the conclusion. So one who does not struggle does not obey Allah. Does not is that relationship. Okay, it's a negative relationship between the propositions. we're taking that because of the fact that in the minor premise we had a negative. Remember? It was one of the conditions. One of them has to be negative. That also means that every single conclusion which is derived from figure 2 is going to have a negative conclusion. Okay? Let's do one. Some minerals are gold. All silvers are not gold. No, not are. It has to be negative. Yeah, are not silver. Because one of our premise has a negative and it's lower than a positive, okay? Therefore, the conclusion is lower of the two premises. Some minerals are not silver. Okay. Hadith from Imam Ali. Alim is one who knows